Doctors of Reddit, have you ever been in a public place and someone shouted, "Is anyone here a doctor?" or something along those lines? What happened? I was on a flight with my grandparents when the flight attendant got on the speakers and asked for any medical professionals to go to the back of the plane. Granddad was a surgeon, so that included him. There was a lady who was very pale and had passed out on the flight. Turns out that she had a phobia of flying and took some anti-anxiety medication before the flight. She also took a calming blend of tea from some holistic shop, and that had a bad reaction with the med she took and made her blood pressure plummet, causing her to pass out. They got her stabilized, read lots and lots of water, and she went to the hospital after the flight. Don't mix meds and holistic remedies, guys. I mentioned it before. Young 30-something in flight nervous me purposely took Dramamine and drank 2 shots of alcohol before flight. I passed out for the entire flight. On a late night flight, around 4 AM or so, lights out, dead silent. Out of nowhere a lady starts yelling, "He's not breathing, he's not breathing." The guy on my window seat comes out of a dead sleep, leaps up and climbs over me before I even knew what was going on and ran back to the man. A few minutes later I could feel the plane accelerate a little and the captain came on and said that LAX had cleared a path for us to land directly without delay. The guy was okay apparently because he was on my connecting flight to Denver. ULPT. Great way to make sure you catch your connecting flight. Was at my stepson's baseball game. 13 years old kids. Infielder takes a line drive to the face and drops to the ground. Our coach yells, "Mike, come quick." Other team's coach yells, "Mike, we need you." 2 dads sprint onto the field, one from each dugout entrance. Both arrive to the player at the same time and look up at each other and realize they both know each other. Both are orthopedic surgeons named Mike. This made me laugh more than it should. My toddler had a seizure in an airport and stopped breathing, and I screamed for a doctor. I was answered first by a military EMT, then a doctor, several nurses, and finally a pediatrician. They got her breathing again and saved her life before the paramedics got there. The first doctor wouldn't let anyone near her unless they told him their medical credentials. The pediatrician was wearing the emptied out, handed off to her husband, carrier for her own baby the entire time. They were also kind and reassuring to me at my most terrifying moment. Stories like this help get me through the tougher days of medical school. That's what it's all about, man. I was having dinner at a fancy restaurant when a guest at the next table had a seizure and collapsed to the floor. As it happens, I was having dinner with 2 orthopedic surgeons, who both got up to help. They were soon relieved by a neurologist and an emergency medicine specialist who took care of the poor guy. He seemed to recover quickly and was probably fine. LPT. If you're going to have a seizure in a restaurant, try to do it close to a National Medical Association conference. I'll plan accordingly. Witnessed a man hit by a motorcycle. A woman comes rushing out of traffic who was a nurse on her way home from the trauma close by. She asked me, a complete stranger, to go get her car and purse so she wasn't carjacked because she left it running in the middle of the road. Nurses are superheroes. My Phil, who is a doctor, had a heart attack while eating dinner with a friend who is also a doctor. They both recognized what was happening and rushed him to the car rather than wait on the ambulance. He drove him at high speed to the very close hospital where my Phil flatlined right after arriving. They got him back, but if he had waited at the restaurant he would have most likely died due to the amount of time it would have took for the ambulance to get there. I once saw a car accident happen and a woman in scrubs on a scooter pulled a U-turn, dumped the scooter in the ditch, pulled gloves out of her pocket and ran to the cars, all in one smooth motion. I swear to God I could see the cape flapping behind her and hear the swell of epic music. The show must go on. I was once one of those patients when this situation happened. It's kind of a dumb situation, but also pretty funny. I once played Blanche in my university production of Streetcar Named Desire. I had had this pain throughout the day of a performance, but decided not to go to a doctor. Well, about 30 minutes before the production I went to the bathroom and peed blood. It was like it hit me at once, and I was so uncomfortable and had to pee every few minutes. I remember the weird sensation, feeling so awful and constantly needing to pee. I told my director. Our entire production was student run, so we didn't exactly have an adult say, "Hey, you should go to the doctor." Instead, One of the other drama kids go on the mic and ask the audience if we had a doctor in the audience. When no one responded, one of our lighting techs came up to the booth and told us he was an EMT. He took my blood pressure, which was fine, but he said we should call it off and send me to the doctor. I was not about to have the entire show stopped for me. I told him I was feeling better and that maybe I just started my period and I didn't realize. I told them all it was just jitters. We did the show and it turned out to be a pretty gnarly kidney infection. I would also like to add, it was some of my best work too. Real easy to act like you are getting violated, dragged off stage, and slowly going mad when it feels like there is a knife in you and you may pee your dress. Not a doctor, but I broke my right radius playing soccer when I was 12. When I was down, a man who I'd never seen before had followed my mom after she came over. Turns out the dude was a doctor and his kid was on the opposing team. I didn't learn this till after the fact cause I was in hella pain. But the dude identified himself as a doctor to my mom and informed her that I had broken a bone and he told her it needed to be set. Fate be damned. This man set my arm on the side of the pitch in between a notebook splint tied together with socks. This happened out of town, so I get to the next day, and after the Rays came back, they informed my mom that my arm had been set perfectly, and if we hadn't told them my arm was broken they would have had a hard time knowing at all. TLDR, random man sets my broken wrist perfectly on the side of a soccer pitch. My aunt was in that situation. Someone on her long distance flight was about to give birth, and she got to move up to first class to deliver the baby. Airplane to Vegas. Woman had a blood sugar issue according to the flight attendant afterward. I just told her I was very happy to see their professionalism at work in a crisis. The doc and crew got the woman stable and we were given priority to Vegas. The pilot basically floored it, which got us into LAS Vegas way early. Early enough to get into Hash House a go-go with a reservation. A bit after we ordered, two ladies are standing there screaming, "Great, happy Mother's Day," except they were shaking a small kid upside down. I got up and moved closer. Little girl was turning colors she shouldn't and not doing well, so I reached in and took her away. Felt for sternum and pulled. No luck. So I lifted hard and she was soon screaming for mama. So, the need for a doctor on a flight saved a little girl several hours later. Mother's Day 2012. And, free breakfast. Little girl last seen eating a giant strawberry when I stopped by to thank her parents for paying our bill. She was not a fan of mine and I am okay with that. Very first time, it was at my cousin's wedding. The patient was his bride, so that was an interesting way to meet the new member of the family. Turns out she was just dehydrated hypoglycemic from not eating all day. Happened to me while a bridesmaid. Hot day, formal wear and high heels. Halfway through the ceremony, I had to sit down so I didn't faint. Groom's sister's husband, a cardiologist, walked me down the aisle. I think I had a very early stage miscarriage. My sister's boyfriend had to do first aid outside a cafe once. The lady made it to the hospital thanks in part to him, but she didn't make it out again. Welcome to Hospital California. This isn't the same thing. But several years ago I was at a med school graduation and the woman announcing the names fainted. When it was clear she was fine, one of the other faculty members asked on the microphone, "Is there a doctor in the house?" and got some big laughs. That's freaking cheeky. I'm an emergency nurse. This has happened numerous times to me. One particular time though, I'm sat on the Eurostar coming back for Paris, sat in Gare du Nord station waiting to pull away, and the conductor comes on the tannoy, "Ladies, gentlemen, is there a doctor aboard? Please come to carriage XX. I think, well, hey, I'm not a doctor. That's not me. About a minute later, "Ladies and gentlemen, please, is there a doctor aboard?" I'm thinking, maybe. Nah, there's bound to be someone. A third time they call out and I was like, a frick it, I better go. Some shoot's going down. I get to the carriage and the guy is sweaty, grey, clammy, seen it plenty of time before. Dude is having an MI, about to collapse. Certainly need to get to a hospital, maybe even PPCI, to open up the heart arteries. I said to the staff, "Get the defib, get oxygen and get an ambulance." I get him all hooked up while we wait, reassure him and hope he doesn't arrest. His blood pressure looked like it was going to drop further, makes you realize what you have to be able to do with no equipment. But his pulse felt weaker and thready, so I've seen it done a couple of times before, but I thought, frick it, Let's get this guy some blood pressure, so I lifted his legs in the air to perfuse him cause he looked like he was going to arrest. All of a sudden a tap on my shoulder. Actually mate, I wouldn't do that. You want those central vessels nice and dilated so it doesn't cause more damage. I was like, who the frick are you? Oh, I'm a cardiologist. I'm S-faced though. Can't risk my GMC number on this. Absolute freaking tit. Cheers mate. No idea what happened to the guy. He got carted off with an ambulance and I experienced how the pre-hospital guys feel all the time because I never found out what happened to them. Very frustrating. This story reminds me of an Ems proverb. If your patient is sweating, you should be too. One time I was at Costco with my aunt, who is an RN, and she helped deliver a baby in the bathroom. It was wild. You really can't get anything there. On a Turkish Airlines flight to Istanbul, just after leaving American airspace, the pilot asks if anyone is a doctor and if they are to inform the stewardess, and the guy next to me gets up and says he's a doctor. Maybe 2 hours after that, the guy's still gone. They turn on all the lights and inform us that we're making an emergency landing in Iceland. Apparently, this man sitting one section in front of us was having muscle spasms in his throat and cutting off oxygen supply. He'd pass out and his throat would relax, and then he'd wake up, and the cycle would repeat. The doctor took one look and said, you need to get him to a hospital or he'll suffocate to death. The thing that sucked the most was waiting for 4 hours on a tarmac and not being able to move, and listening to a bunch of buttholes complain about it to stewardesses like it was their or anyone's fault. At Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, a teenager collapsed and his girlfriend ran to call 911. One middle-aged onlooker was screaming this. Okay, I was an army medic. I assume it is dehydration or something similar. He is very confused and obviously drunk. Probably dehydrated, but he is conscious and is breathing and has a pulse. Got him some shade and a drink of water. My work here is done. This lady starts yelling, are you a doctor, like a foot from my face. I say no, but he is just dehydrated. 911 was called. Things will be okay. She then runs down the boardwalk calling for a doctor. I stayed with the kid until the ambulance got there. That lady never returned with real medical attention. They say to this day she's still out there, looking for a doctor. My father-in-law is a doctor. On 2 occasions in church I have seen him help a little old lady who collapsed from heat stroke. He says it's happened 5 times. All were fine. The pastor literally didn't even stop his homily as the woman was carried out to the hallway for my Phil to look at her. My takeaway is that the church needs to install a fricking AC. I went to Catholic school, and I swear someone passed out almost every mass. Spring for the AC already, guys. My sister was on an airplane as a newly minted doctor, like out of school for less than 3 months, when there was a medical emergency and the flight attendants asked for medical professions. She got up, and an older, 60s, man, and she felt relieved because he could take the lead. Turns out he was a cosmetic dermatologist and hadn't done first aid in decades, so she actually had to do the initial exam and workup. Turns out the guy who they were treating was just nauseous and hungover and being dramatic about it. How many times have I been catastrophically hungover and wished for a doctor, and here is someone with 2 mid-flight. I was at the movies with my friend when I was in high school. We were 15, I believe. I had a seizure early on in the film. I threw my drink and popcorn in the air onto the seats behind me. Now this was in a very small town during the day, so including myself and my friend there were a total of 6 people seeing that film. There was a doctor and a nurse in the audience who came to help me. They stayed with me the whole time and followed up with me after I got back home. That Christmas I sent them a bunch of movie tickets to thank them. A friend of mine's dad is an EMT for the fire department, and he once was on his hands-free in the car to my friend who was in the car too, so I could hear everything. He was crossing a motorway bridge when I hear him sigh. My friend asks what's wrong. He says I'm gonna be late for work, then hangs up. We presumed he was after hitting traffic. He gets home, I'm still in my friend's house, and he explained that there was a car crash on the motorway below him, so he stopped and ran down a slipway to the lady out of the car and organized the emergency services. We were on Main Street in Disney World around closing time. A man in his 30s or 40s was walking around as if drunk, staring at the lights on the tops of the buildings. He bumped into a photographer about to take our picture, and my wife, a nurse, said, "Oh crap, he's about to seize." Sure enough, about 5 seconds later he slowly falls down and starts convulsing. I quickly grabbed a blanket our daughters were using in the stroller and put it under his head so he wouldn't knock himself out. My wife cleared the area and called the shots. Disney's response time was absolutely horrid. She had to scream for a worker to go find a need, and it wasn't until she yelled at about the third or fourth worker before she found one who even knew what it was. It took about 10 minutes before the on-site medical team finally showed up. For a company that is otherwise run like a well-oiled machine, their emergency responders left a lot to be desired. We had a terrible experience with medical assistance as well at Disney involving my daughter having an asthmatic attack. I thought the same thing. Parade's excellent, medical assistance not so much. Obligatory not a doctor, but, story. Not a doctor but was on a plane next to a guy who was really nice and kept trying to chat. This was during the peak of my anxiety struggles and I had a plan in place to focus on playing Mario Kart the entire trip, so I was kind of brushing him off. All the while internally my panic was starting to set in. I don't know what I did to make it obvious I was about to flip, but he was like, "Calm down, I'm a doctor. You just need to breathe," and got me ice and kept talking to me to keep me calm and distracted. He was extremely kind in that the entire 4 hours ride he was very attuned to making me feel better. Towards the end of the flight he's like, "Yeah, every flight I go on I have to do my doctorly duties with someone, so it's alright." And as if on cue the stewardesses respond to commotion in the back of the plane and asked for a doctor. He smiled at me knowingly and then went to help the guy in the back who apparently was having heart palpitations. He ended up being okay, but man, I was so astounded by his niceness that on the flight home I was just reassured that even if I'm struggling there will be someone to help, and I hope that if I'm ever needed I can help too. Man, this warms my heart. I was meeting my mom to see a show one evening in Nick and we were meant to meet for dinner beforehand. I was waiting in the restaurant for her until 15 minutes before the show when I figured I should call and tell her to hurry up. She is notoriously late. She picks up, tells me to meet her at a location 2 blocks away from the restaurant on 48th. No questions asked, she says and hangs up. You know how your mind immediately thinks the worst? I tried to tell myself she just probably needed change for the meter or something. Anyway, I leave immediately. As I turn the corner, I watch 3 ambulances and 2 cop cars turn onto 48th. So I full sprint through Times Square. I turn onto the street and check every ambulance that I pass for her face. I see a circle of policemen surrounding something. I scream that's my mom and push through. I look down to see my mother giving CPR to an 80-year man with a huge scar down his chest who is absolutely blue. His wife stood next to me asking if they were still going to make their show. My full sprint had gotten me there just before the EMTs who were fighting traffic. My mom informs the newly present EMTs of the situation as they take over CPR. She then gets up, asks them if they have everything under control, and they nod and thank her. She looks at me and says ready to go, we made it to the show on time. As it turns out, my mother, the gastroenterologist, had watched this 83-year-old man collapse on the street in front of her as she was walking to meet me. A cop and a different physician had begun taking his pulse by the time my mom got to him. My mom walks up to this group, realizes this man does not have a pulse just by looking at him, bright blue, asks them a couple of questions and then takes charge and begins CPR. The cop and the other physician were still a bit flustered. She had answered my call during one of her CPR breaks after having switched off with the cop. So my mom left absolutely defeated and angry with herself that she hadn't rushed over sooner to begin CPR. The most crucial time is that first minute and she felt so guilty for not ordering the cop and physician to begin sooner. The man was old and clearly had had a bypass surgery, indicated by the large scar on his chest. She told me she thought he must have died before she had even got her hands on him. She was so sad. 2 days later, guess who's on the cover of our local newspaper? The man I could have sworn I watched die. He was sitting up in his hospital bed smiling next to his wife. While there was no mention of my mom in the paper, without her there would be no him. Also, she's not so sad anymore. Of all the ones I've read here, this is by far the best one. Props to your mom. Several times on flights. Dizziness, shortness of breath, vomiting. Once a guy had a seizure at the gate of a flight I was walking past. Often there was another doc with an actual emergency medicine type background, a doc, internist, anesthesiologist. So I did not have to do anything. Surgeon. Living in Boston almost guarantees there is another doc around when I'm flying lol. Planes count? Happened on back-to-back flights to my wife. She thought the first lady would be okay with some fluids on the ground. Wasn't able to administer them on the flight, but the lady on the second flight needed an ICU. My wife stabilized her the best she could, but there's only so much you can do on a plane. Thankfully she had taken a course the prior year specifically about in-flight emergencies, so she knew the hard limits of what can be done on a commercial flight. Also, literally no one thanked her, neither flight crew or paramedics on the ground. Heck, the paramedics didn't even want to hear vitals. Freaking United. My dad isn't a doctor. We were on vacation in the Dominican Republic at a resort, and one evening the show was a circus show by the pool. There was a part where a clown on unicycle was supposed to fall and land in the pool, except the guy fell the wrong way, cracking his skull against the concrete around the pool. Without hesitation, Dad went over and helped the guy until local help could arrive. There was also a time where a kid broke his arm at an open house for our elementary school. Dad made a splint out of a ruler till the kid could get to the air. No joke, Dad received a bill from the state of California for the cost of the ruler. I hope he responded with a bill for his medical services. Not a doctor, but I used to be a volunteer EMT and did some combat medic. I also keep an updated CPR qualification. Both times it was at a pool, not the same pool. Once someone started screaming when I was at his buddy's house and was in earshot of the pool. We ran over, and someone had been found in the jacuzzi face down. The guy was dead. CPR isn't going to bring someone back from death though. The second time some kid busted his head jumping into the pool and slipping and hitting the edge. I ran inside, grabbed the first aid kit, had someone call 911. I'm in the US and I bandaged the wound until the EMTs could arrive. Talked to the kid making sure he wasn't having problems communicating. Also it helps keep him calm. Nice work. This further cements my belief that pools are crazy dangerous places. Still waiting for it to happen. I've got a PhD, and I'm convinced I can save lives by explaining Bourdieu and Foucault to dying people. At a high school basketball game, kid jumps in the air for a rebound and comes down awkwardly on his ankle. He is immediately in pain and his ankle is obviously broken, evident from the unnatural angle his foot is positioned in. The trainer and coaching staff rushed out and helped him. And over the PA speaker someone asked, if there is a doctor in the house please report to the floor. He'll never forget two things. 1. The way it looked when they threw a towel over his leg. It was like an erection sticking straight up in the air. 2. The sound of a hushed crowd. That sounds weird, but when there's 700 or so people stoic and quiet there's a sound. After letting their toddler sit in the hot tub, I'd hope they would stop having children altogether. Years ago when I was in between graduating with a bachelor's and getting into med school, we took a family vacation to an all-inclusive resort. Both parents are doctors. My father is an anesthetist, mother is a surgeon and did critical care under for years. My parents met a couple at the resort who had 2 children with the names of both of my brothers. This family was at the pool hot tub area one evening, and despite the numerous warnings for no children under 14 allowed in the hot tub, this family allowed the 4 or 5-year-old into the hot tub. We had just arrived and the kid stops breathing and going into convulsions and eventually a full seizure. My parents had already run over by the time the kid slouched. As my mother said, "Oh boy, that kid doesn't look right." My parents administered CPR, got the kid breathing again, and ended up handing him off to EMS, calling the hospital about the kid in advance, and pretty much getting the staff prepped as much as possible about the kid. The couple promised to name their next child after me, to thank my parents for jumping into action. My aunt, mom's sister, was out for breakfast one morning when she heard a commotion outside. Being a nurse, she ran outside to see if there was anything she could do. Turns out a lady was hit by a car while crossing the street. As they waited for the EMT to arrive, she started to do everything she could to save this lady. After the lady was taken to the hospital and my aunt started to make sense of everything, she realized that the lady she was trying to save was actually my dad's sister, so my other aunt. She did not survive. However, there is no doubt in my mind that she didn't do everything in her power to try and save her. The double negative has me thinking your mom's sister didn't provide sufficient care. I'm a sailplane pilot. One day years ago, a member of my club was soaring over Colorado and ran into a common problem. Not enough thermal lift to make it back to the airport. So he landed on a golf course in Colorado Springs. A man came running up and panted, "I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor," whereupon Jim opened the canopy, stepped out and said, "That's nice. I'm in real estate." That's pretty good immediate response from the doctor. My mom was. A man started seizing. She and another doctor friend happened to be walking by and jumped in to help. A crowd gathered which hurled verbal abuse at them, called them stupid, criticized their technique, and someone even got physical with them. These days, my mother doesn't answer if anyone shouts for a doctor. Another obligatory, not a doctor, but I used to be a flight attendant and have had to page for medical assistance more times than I ever thought I would. There has always, yes, I know, anecdotal been at least one person with medical experience on board, whether it was a doctor, nurse, or EMT. In case that makes anyone feel better. Scariest experience was when a fellow flight attendant started seizing on landing and wasn't secured. Coolest use of equipment was figuring out how to hang an IV from the overhead bin. Not a doctor, but I was with my German class at a German food place and a girl from my class started choking. She tried to drink water and it just came spilling back out. Turns out both a doctor and a nurse were in the place, not together, and they ended up arguing about what to do because the Heimlich maneuver helped her a bit. She was able to get some air. The food was still lodged. After a minute of them bickering, a large Australian dude, this was in the US, came over, told them they were both idiots and flipped the 16-year-old girl upside down. He gave her a hard whack on the back, food came flying out, and he sat back down and finished his dinner. We were at a theme park, got off one of the larger rides in the park, was leaving. Behind us come two guys carrying a girl who had passed out on the ride. My dad, being an MD, administered some first response care to make sure she was okay until the park medics got there. Little thing, but still the right thing to do. Yes, I'm a doctor but not a medical one. My life's dream is for someone on a plane to yell for a doctor so I can tell them they are having an existential crisis and walk them through their panic attack. As a person with anxiety and panic disorder who also doesn't like flying, I would love to have someone keep my panic at bay while on a flight. Ash Wednesday in church at lunchtime getting ashes. Old guy 3 rows ahead of me went into cardiac arrest and collapsed on his pew. Priest stopped mass for a minute until we got him stabilized and then continued. Priest was still saying mass when the EMTs picked up the patient. Patient made it. Sitting in church one day, women in front goes down. Preacher keeps preaching as she's taken away by ambulance. She has a brain aneurysm. Turns out preacher protocol is to keep preaching so congregation doesn't panic. Thankfully woman made an almost complete recovery. Not a doctor, but I was traveling with a woman who was a doctor. An elderly man had a stroke on a plane from Mexico to Atlanta. They asked for a doctor on the intercom. She went. He was unresponsive, but had breath and a heartbeat. They took a hard right to Sarasota and got him off to the air. May I brag on my spouse? He was walking in the neighborhood and came upon a car accident. My spouse is a doctor. The accident wasn't serious, but the passenger was unresponsive. My spouse realized that the passenger was overdosing on opiates and told the police that the passenger needed Narcan. The cops said they'd been trained to administer Narcan, but didn't have any. When the EMTs arrived, my spouse requested Narcan for the passenger, and they were able to bring him back to responsiveness. He may have been okay anyway, but my spouse may have saved his life. You described it very calmly. In my head your spouse is screaming Narcan stat. I said stat B. I wasn't personally involved because there were much better qualified people around, but at med school graduation a few weeks ago, lady collapsed outside while everyone was milling around. It was a cardiac arrest. Couldn't have picked much of a better place. 200 newly graduated doctors and half of them come from medical families. Well, once I was the one yelling for a doctor. I was on a flight when a man collapsed in the aisle next to me. A doctor from the front of the plane answered and came to help him out. I translated for them because the man hardly spoke any English. It turned out to be nothing too serious and the man was okay. not medical personnel, was a passenger on aircraft. During last 30 minutes stewardess calls and asks for any available medical personnel. Guy 2 rows behind me seemed unconscious. Went smoothly and we landed early. Stewardess gave strict instructions for everyone to remain seated until the MT came on the plane and took custody of the man. Watched as all of first class stood up anyways and took their bags to egress the jet. This delayed further care to the patient. It was one of the rudest displays I have seen in my adult life. That's really fricked up. Makes me sad when I see humans ignore the most basic rules of humanity, empathy and compassion. I can't fathom treating another human with so little regard. If getting off a plane half an hour earlier is more important to you than allowing someone's life to be saved, you may want to try a little harder not to be a prick. You have been visited by the wisdom pupper type. Study well, pupper, or you will fail your next text at school. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.